Now, this is kind of how your application is broken down. And this is important because a lot of people don't read the questions and don't give us the answers surrounding the questions. So I'm giving you the questions up front, and you can also go on the website and see all of this. We have a community policing website, but I must tell you that in the future, all of the committees have to get rid of their individual website, and there's going to be one IACP website, so I can't tell you at this point what that's going to be. So that part of the process will change a little bit, but right now the website is still up. It's IACP Community Policing. The first part is the executive summary, and you got to do it in 300 words. And it talks about the problem and environment in which your agency was dealing with the issue, the solution and the implementation overview, and the overall results of the initiative. So think about the keywords just there. So that's the first section. And then there's a framework question, and the question is a series of questions referring to your agency and its relationship with the community as a whole. Question number 1, is there significant evidence that the philosophy and practices of community policing are well integrated in all activities of the department as a whole? Extremely important. It can't be a unit that's just doing this. Now, the unit might be in control of it, but you have to show in this documentation community policing as a whole. The next question deals with evidence clearly, consistently communicates the philosophy and practice of community policing with citizens, partners, and stakeholders throughout the community. Keywords: citizens, partners, stakeholders throughout the community. Another question that we grade on each of these questions. We're reading your documentation and we're grading you on whether you are telling us this. Next question deals with significant evidence that there is activity, is that you are actively engaged in problem identification and problem solving with the agency. And the next area is the initiative. Question number 1, the problem or issue was clearly identified to a well-defined process and involved appropriate partners and stakeholders. So you got to show that you're involving those stakeholders there. Another question, community partners played a significant role in planning and implementing the initiative. Now think about that. You know, I started in policing in the 70s and the 60s, and it was all about control and command. So a lot of times we took our programs in the community and pushed it on the community. These programs, the community has to help you determine what the issues are. Very important there. Another question, the objectives and anticipated results were clearly defined, realistic, and addressed the problem and the concern. Another question, the actions taken to meet the objectives by both the police and the community were appropriate and well planned. This was not just an off-the-shelf program. Planning going into it. And a final question in that area is challenges within the department or within the community were recognized and dealt with appropriately. Another area has to do with evaluation. We have not been good, folks, in evaluating. In most of our entries, that's probably the weakest area. So if you got a college or university or someone out there that can help you, let them come in and help you evaluate the program. Because, again, if you're a winner, your program's going to be shared, not only here in the Police Chief magazine, but it's going to be put out in the website somewhere and shared with people all over the world. So the evaluation is critical. So that is kind of what we're looking for in your entries. but I can't tell you how important it is to start your documentation when you begin your program. And that's going to help you throughout. Now, the area of branding. Branding to me is marketing. When I was with Henrico County, we went out to the top marketing advertising agency in our area, which was the Richmond, Virginia area. They came on board with us for no cost to help us brand a particular program or what we were doing. So that's not our side of the table that we are best in. So reach out in your community and on your team, put someone from a marketing agency or an advertising agency to help you in that perspective. And I look forward for any questions that you have about this process. Catch me in the hall afterwards. Send me an email. It's foxjamesdouglas@aol.com. And we also have a Travis Parrish, who is a big part of our awards committee in the room, that he can help me with any questions that you have later on.
Good morning. My name is Michael DeLeo. I'm the Chief of Police in Tallahassee, Florida. I'm going to talk this morning a little bit about a transition to a new agency as an outside chief and rebuilding and building that community trust that we all work very hard at. So I'll talk about from two perspectives. One is that internal trust, because if we can't do that internally with our own people and have that communication and those relationships, we're certainly not going to be able to do it on the outside. So coming in from the outside as a new chief, that's part of the perspective. And then also, as you're working on that, to simultaneously trying to develop relationships with the community as well. I came from a smaller agency, Plantation, Florida, which is just outside Fort Lauderdale, so about 7 hours south of Tallahassee. So no previous real relationships in the Tallahassee-Leon County community, truly an outside chief coming in, my first chief's job, and if we only knew what we thought we knew when we were getting into this, you do some things differently. There's certainly the roads that you learn along the way. But I came in on the heels of a very rough year for TPD. There was a use of force incident that really shook the community, and it was not along racial lines. It was white officers and a white woman that really kind of shook up the community and really led to the changes that brought me to TPD. There was a jurisdictional case with an issue with the state attorney and the sheriff who really wanted to eliminate TPD and consolidate power, and we're using that as a motivating factor. And then there was also a small investigation involving a future #1 pick of the NFL draft that the community was not happy with the way it went and the way things were portrayed. And we all know the sensitivities of dealing with sexual assault investigations and things you can share and information that you can't. So those were really three major issues coming in from the outside that the community was concerned about. And then you're talking about a department in transition. By the time the previous chief left late October, and I got there December 30th, so it was a very quick turnaround. And about a month later, I was down to me and 3 captains as a command staff for a department of about 550 people. So you're talking about a lot of internal change as well. So very early on, I started trying to meet with as many employees as possible. At the end of the first month, I put out a letter trying to reintroduce myself again and what the future expectations were. Accentuate on the positives. The TPD had a very good reputation of being very active in the community, but like Chief Fox just mentioned, there were a lot of programs. It was this unit's responsibility or that unit's job to run this program. So the emphasis was that we had a shared responsibility not only to the community, but to each other to make sure that we were providing the best services possible. I started doing ride-alongs. One of the things that was surprising to me going to a larger agency was that when you talk to officers, a lot of the officers, the only time they had ever seen the chief was when they were sworn in and really had no other interaction with the previous administration. So, I mean, it helps to get a little credibility. I got sworn in, had a nice meal with my family, was back for midnight shift, and got in a foot chase 2 hours later. So with the watch commander, and as we're running, and Lieutenant Abby's in great shape, does ultra marathons, things like that. But I was a little quicker, and he's behind me. I'm like, you can't lose me because I have no idea where I am. But when you're saying things on the radio, all of a sudden your officer's going, oh my gosh, yeah, we have a chief that actually might be a cop. And that went a long ways to kind of opening up the door. I went through warrant training and went and served search warrants with our warrant team. So, you know, things like that. I also gave them access to me, not just, you know, by setting appointments, but meeting them when and wherever they wanted to, because I was pretty much there 7 days a week for the first year and a half or so. And they didn't, a lot of the officers did not have access. A lot of the line staff, because it wasn't just the officers, did not have access to the chief to have conversations before, and they were actually discouraged from having conversations with the chief. And there were repercussions if they talked to the chief. So it's taken years of an internal culture change to get to where we need to be. I know we all think that we have our ideas and we have our expectations of what we think best practices are. I worked with a lot of external groups to bring in outside experts to do policy reviews, training reviews, procedural reviews. I know we're not supposed to say the P word here, but yes, I did work with some PERF. I worked with End Violence Against Women International. I even reached out to Amnesty International and did some local work with them. We had a lot of public critics when you're in a state capitol who are very welcome to take shots at you until you bring them in and show them what you're doing. And then when you start getting them coming to the public defending what you're doing, it made a huge difference in the community as far as repercussions. You know, I talked about, you know, obviously significant changes in the command staff. I didn't do any promotions to my command staff till I had been there almost 9 months. And people kept going, well, when are you going to do the promotions? Because it costs, you know, some uncertainty. And I just would joke with people and say, well, right now we're all just dating, right? It's early on. When you come in from the outside and you're trying to get to know people, you know, if you bring a whole bunch of people in from the outside, that causes a lot of resentment too. So I wanted to really try to help build people internally. And you can fake it for 30 days or 60 days when you're just starting out with your relationship and you're showing up on time and everything else. But after a few months, your real character and your real person shows through about the people who want to work and who are really dedicated to our profession. And then I've also started meeting with every employee in the police department. I'm almost up to almost 600 employees. So what I do is I meet in groups of squads or units. And it takes about 2 months of 2 days a week to get through everybody, because each meeting lasts between an hour and a half to 2 hours. There's no agenda. I'll give them some updates on different projects we're working on, and they get to ask whatever they want to ask, make whatever comments they want to make. I've been told I've made some stupid decisions, and I probably have. I don't take it personal, but they've never had the ability to actually sit down with the chief and have just an open forum. There's no supervisors in the room. I meet with the supervisor separately. So whatever they want to talk about, and then we were able to go back and resolve some of those issues. So that's internally to start building that trust, to develop those relationships. Externally, like I said, I kind of outlined those 3 major issues. Publicly, the message was, I understand, and we have to be held accountable, and you have every right to question everything we do. But we handled 187,000 calls for service that year. If you're not happy about 3, you have every right to not be happy, and there's things that we can do better. That's a pretty good batting average. So question us when we need to be questioned, and I welcome that. But don't forget about all the good work that we do. And it really changed the tenor of the conversation, because the previous administration's famous quote was no comment. And I'm a very open and very direct person, so I don't mind the difficult questions. I don't mind giving the difficult answers. When we make mistakes, we own it. I was there about 10 months. We had an officer tase a 62-year-old woman as a spillover from another investigation. I had a 2 a.m. press conference where I released the video before the media got it and said, here's what it is, here's what we're doing about it. This is the investigation we're going to start, and they'll go from there. We didn't wait for somebody else to come to us and say, hey, we heard about this or we saw that video. We put it out there proactively. My cell phone number is probably the most widely published cell phone number in Tallahassee. It's on my business cards. I give it to everyone, and people told me I was crazy. I've only been called from one traffic stop in 4 years now, almost 4 years, because I just gave it out. If you have a question, if you have a concern, I work for them. They have to be able to reach us. They have to be able to talk to us, and everybody gets my cell phone number. We started working a program what we call Operation Safe Neighborhoods during the summer, where with community groups, we literally go door to door in neighborhoods, knock on doors, introduce ourselves, introduce services that are available not just from the police department, but from the entire city and community and the private sector and not-for-profit groups. It's been really amazing to watch some different groups to come together when you have a historical Black fraternity meet the police department in a neighborhood with a predominantly white church congregation from one of the Methodist churches on the opposite side of town in a city that's 103 square miles. We all spend a half hour or so together, and then we partner up and literally canvass a neighborhood, going door to door, knocking on doors together. So we're creating opportunities for people to get involved in neighborhoods that they would have never driven to before, may not even been aware we're part of this city. We work food drives with the media. We try very hard to work with the media. Like I said, the previous mantra was no comment. We do food drives, one with the TV station at Thanksgiving time and one with the newspaper during the summertime. And the summertime program is mainly geared at feeding children because we have about a 25% poverty rate in my city. So that's about 40,000 people living below the poverty line, not counting our universities. So we have a lot of students, a lot of children that are now missing out on 2 meals a day because schools closed during the summertime. So we do a food drive. Just the police department donated over 2,600 pounds of food this last summer. So we're doing not just the policing aspect of it, and there's plenty of those programs where we're doing street-level drug enforcement and working with programs, but really accentuating the community aspect of it. It's been a big component of promotions, hiring, all those conversations, and the results have been pretty remarkable. The communications when I got there, a nice email or phone call would have been TPD sucks. Excuse my language, but that would have been a nice email that I got, considering some of the letters and some of the issues that were perceived. The community, there's not a day that goes by that our officers don't get stopped, our staff doesn't get stopped, someone buys them lunch. Our wellness program has to really focus on nutrition now because we have platters of food dropped off on almost a daily basis from different groups of kids, school groups, families, businesses to say thank you. And most importantly from the community, they just approved a tax increase 2 years ago. I've been there just for 3 budgets now. I started with 355 sworn positions. I'm up to 410 now. They've invested about $5 million in technology for me, and they now have allowed me to hire an architect company to look at building a new facility, and the manager wants to start construction within 2 years. That does not happen if your community doesn't support you. When you're talking about that type of investment, a property tax increase that affects a lot of people, being the state capital, about half of our properties are off the tax rolls between the government facilities, the universities, and then the religious institutions. So that disproportionately impacts a small group of your citizens. And everyone that came, even the people who weren't not happy about the tax increase, said get the police department what they need, get the chief and his people whatever they need to succeed, just pay for it a different way. But there was not one person that came and spoke out against the police department we were trying to accomplish. So that's just kind of the last 3.5 years or so in a snapshot, and I'll turn over to Chief Simmons.
Hi, my name is Kristen Zeman. I am the police chief of Aurora, Illinois, home of Wayne's World, for anyone. That's our only claim to fame. We are the second largest city in the state of Illinois, so we have 46 square miles, 200,000 population, and roughly 300 sworn officers. I've been chief for 22 months, and I say that instead of 2 years, because then if I mess up, it still sounds like I'm a novice, but when I hit that 2-year mark, I'll go there. So one of the things that we've been, and by the way, I came up in my organization. This has been my one police department, so I grew up both literally and figuratively in my organization. And one of the things that we have done very well is count things. We count just like UCR codes and all of the data that we collect, which is extremely important because that tells us how we're doing. We were in a period in the 90s of 37 homicides a year. And so it's important that, when we, especially in decreases, that's even more important that we count things. So I tell you that because that's always the #1 goal in a police department is crime, fighting crime. That is our primary focus, is to enforce laws. But we've not done so well is in community engagement. However, we checked the boxes very well. We have a community-oriented policing unit that is comprised of 18 officers, and they are charged with the things that Chief Fox said, the problem solving, getting to the neighborhood groups, determining what the problems are, starting the SARA model, assessing from beginning to end. But it started to occur to me that we have 18 community-oriented policing officers, but 300 officers, and I thought there could be a philosophy, instead of just moving it to those 18 cops to take care of the kissing of the babies and all that touchy-feely stuff. I thought, what if we could adopt the philosophy and have all 300 officers just identify with that philosophy of community policing. So what we have done at the beginning of every year is to set goals for our police department. So as I mentioned earlier, the #1 goal is always crime reduction. We want people to feel safe in our city, whether they work or live there, safe to raise their children, safe to play. So always the #1 overarching goal. Our secondary goal in the past years has been crash reduction. And that's important as well. We want to make sure that we're aligned to that crash reduction goal with action items, writing tickets. But it was actually a sergeant who recently retired that said to me, people aren't going to say, I'm just not going to move to Aurora because there's too many car crashes there. So I started to think about that, and I thought about the crime reduction goal, but I thought about the community engagement goal. So the problem for me is, as I mentioned, counting things is very easy, but the problem is I'm not sure how to quantify community engagement. I wasn't sure what to put in place where we could count those things and measure our success. We have things like surveys that we can send out, and that's all fine and good, but we decided to try something a little unorthodox in our police department. So we set a goal of community engagement, and we left it as vague as that. And so here's the way I described it to the officers. I said, what I would like you to do is to go out there. Now we have assigned districts, and so there's permanent shifts, assigned districts, and so I said they are going to be the emperor or the sheriff, whatever they want, however they want to identify themselves of their district, which means they're responsible for the crime that occurs there, but they're also responsible for building relationships there. And I gave one example. I said, what I'm asking you to do is to go out in your assigned area, park your squad car, get out of your squad car, and walk down the street. And I said, I'm going to make a prediction of what would happen if you did that. And I said, what I imagine happening is that you are walking down the street, and the people whose houses are aligned on that street will invariably look out the window, and they will do this. Honey, there's a cop outside. Do you see that cop? I wonder what's going on. And then they'll talk amongst themselves for a few minutes, and then one of them will decide to walk outside and say, officer, what's going on? Is everything okay? To which you will reply, Absolutely nothing. I just want to introduce myself. There's nothing going on. My name is Officer Jones. Here is my business card. Here is my phone number. If you see anything that might be suspicious, because we obviously have 46 square miles to cover and we can't be everywhere at one time, you notice when things are out of sorts in your neighborhood. So give me a call. This is my assigned area. I'm your police officer. And so I thought if we started making contacts in times of peace, then the natural consequence would be building relationships so that when the defecation hit the oscillation, that we would have a more legitimate, trusting partnership. So that's all I asked, and I gave them the autonomy to do that. There's actually a book by Daniel Pink that I read, and he said that employees, and it's not specific to policing, but he said employees want three things. They want autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I thought, let's try that. Let's give these officers the autonomy to do exactly what it is that they're good at. And really, our police officers are really good at talking to people. We just haven't really given them the tools or the permission to do that. So as I mentioned, it's difficult to quantify. So what we started doing was just carte blanche, telling our officers to do that. We had one shift, a lieutenant on that shift that likes to count things, and that's a good thing, but he decided to count community engagement. So here's what was interesting with that. That was one shift. So then my afternoon shift and midnight shift did not count. They just went out and did. So it actually happened that on that particular shift where they started counting community engagement, that it didn't work. I had officers coming to me saying, well, I have to do 2 community engagements during my shift. So when I stop at the gas station and ask for the key to the bathroom, I count that as a community engagement. Officers will always find loopholes for everything. They're very good at it, very creative in that regard. So we scrapped that and we just said, just get out there and talk to people in times of peace. And the philosophy is that, well, we also, let me back up a little bit. We also had a policy where officers could not be on any social media in their police uniform. And it was for obvious reasons, because officers were getting jammed up with being on social media, doing things that did not put them in a favorable light while in their uniform. And so we scrapped that policy, but with obviously the caveat, that you can put yourself on social media, and we encourage it, but make sure that is placing the department and yourself in a positive light. And so what we wanted to do was let the positive overshadow the negative. Now, again, that was the only direction I gave them, was to just get out there and talk to people. And I can tell you that they not only met those expectations, but they exceeded those expectations. Very difficult to quantify, however, but I know that when I walked out to a neighborhood meeting or to a luncheon, I would get this. One of your officers stopped me. I was taking my garbage out and introduced themselves. And it became the narrative, just one after another. And I thought, oh man, they've got it, they're getting it, and it's actually working. But as I said, they not only met expectations, they exceeded those expectations. And what they started doing were out-of-the-box, creative problem solving, the obvious things, like they would get out of their car and play basketball with kids. Now, that's great until HR called me because one of them pulled a hamstring while they were playing basketball, and they was like, wait a minute, they're playing basketball on duty? The answer is yes, that was under my direction, was community engagement, okay. But they dressed up as superheroes, a group of them, and went to hospitals in the area. They raised money for some less fortunate individuals in one of their districts. A group of them got together, raised money, and actually got a new apartment and furnished an apartment based on this community engagement goal. They visit sick kids at home. If they hear that there are kids that love law enforcement, they'll go and visit them, pick them up for school. Now, I started, and I asked everyone in our police department to align to this goal, not just a uniformed patrol officer. So then I had the investigations division come together and with some creative ways to go give back, and they were actually the ones that dressed up as superheroes and went to hospitals. The Honor Guard and Pipes and Drums, which meet once a month to train, have now added a community, to align themselves to the community engagement goal, have added something once a month where they go in to feed my starving children or go to a food bank. And so they have a new volunteer initiative every month that they do. They do coat collection. So they have not only met those expectations, but they have exceeded those expectations. And the best part about this entire thing is that none of this was my idea. It was all them, and they took it and they ran with it. And that's where I think that notion comes in of autonomy, giving them the tools and the desire to do that. Now, we're not counting them, but I can tell you a few outcomes that have resulted from this community engagement goal. One of them happened when, as I mentioned, and there are times of peace and then times where there is strife. One of our officers was in an officer-involved shooting, and during that shooting, gunfire was exchanged. He was on a traffic stop. The passenger got out of the car and started shooting at the officer. The officer returned fire. Fortunately, neither of them struck one another. A foot pursuit ensued, and that officer chased the suspect, to which he then overpowered, went into a home, committed a home invasion to try to lose the officer. And then that family actually kicked him out of the house, but it was at that point that that suspect shot himself in the head and killed himself. Now, you can see that the narrative, coming out of this event might be questionable, especially if you don't trust the police officers in your community. And again, we came out, just as you had mentioned, right away and said, here are the facts as we know them. Here's what happened. So there was a group from Chicago that was slated to come protest. They launched a Facebook page and said they were coming to Aurora. They didn't believe that it happened in the way that we reported that it happened. And so there was this momentum for this big protest to come to our city. And I watched this Facebook page, and we were all keeping an eye on it. But here's what I did not predict that would happen, is that all of our, not all, but our residents took to that Facebook page and said, do not come to this city. And these were not police officers, these were not city officials, they were residents that said, we know what happened, we are confident in what happened, we trust our police officer. They said, we know that police officer. And I watched this momentum that was coming to our city slowly dissipate because the residents rose up. So that is, to me, the best outcome. I don't need to count community engagement contacts. I don't need to have, an abacus that tells me how many times you say hello to a resident. That, to me, was the biggest outcome, and that we can hang our hat on. And we've had several officer-involved shootings since that time, and the same thing has happened, is that our citizens rise up in defense of our police department, and that consequence is far than what I expected. In fact, I expected this, my hope was that this would build trust with our police officers and our residents, to build that legitimacy. But it's actually gone far beyond that as well. And I don't think the police officers expected to have the outcomes that they have had. And let me tell you what I mean by that, is that we have a tendency to become a little calloused in this profession, and that is understandable given that the people that we usually run into in the course of our day are people that are at their lowest, or people that are hurting one another. We see human beings in their lowest form, and it stands to reason that if you're a mechanic and you work on broken cars all day, that you'll think all cars are broken. It's no different in police officers, and why we get that mirrored sunglasses and attitude is because sometimes when you deal with broken human beings all day, you tend to believe that all human beings are broken. And so another unintended consequence of this initiative of community engagement has been officers who are reminded that the reason that they took this job was because they are here to help people, right? How many interviews have you said, and I just want to help people, I just want to make a difference. And somewhere along the way, you lose that notion and that philosophy of why you got in it in the first place. And if you're not careful, you'll lose yourself in all of that, and you'll become unrecognizable. What I have seen are officers who were even apprehensive about coming on to this goal and to align themselves to it have said that they are getting more out of it than the citizens themselves, at least from their vantage point, is that it's renewed their energy and their outlook in this profession. And so there's nothing soft about it. You know, we're still law enforcers. We're still warriors, and I defy the notion of this movement of anyone to say, you know, we are guardians and not warriors. I think that we're both, actually, and one of the things that I tell our police officers is that you're guardians most of the time. You're guardians of this community, but you know, you also have to have that warrior spirit along with that servant heart. I mean, we're the first line of defense for all of our communities. When the 9/11 attacks, when San Bernardino, all of these attacks, and the most recent, black helicopters didn't come down with military. You know, these are police officers that are running towards gunfire. So make no mistake, we are absolutely warriors, but we are guardians just the same. And I think that's where that community engagement goal really comes into play, is that they know that, you know, for the most part, we are there to build those relationships. But when we have to, we will put on, you know, the warrior face, the warrior mindset. So I believe that creative problem solving has come out of this. And again, if you ask me to count it, I simply can't, but I know it's working. So I also think that we need to tell officers the why behind the do. You know, here's why I want you to just make contact, just because we want them to call you if something goes wrong. But the why is what creates the purpose, is why I'm in this profession. And we have to give them the tools. So we have to allow them a little bit of time to say, go out and play basketball with the kids. If there's a couple priority 3 calls pending, I'm good with that. So that has to start at the top. We have to give them permission to do that. And I think that if we give them the autonomy to create meaningful relationships, that they will surprise you with their ingenuity.
Hi, good morning. My name is James Sartell. I'm the Chief of Police in Hollis, New Hampshire. I think I represent the smaller departments in the room. One of the things that I was struck when the Chief was talking was not my idea. I could build my entire 5 or 10 minute little speech on the fact that it's not my idea. One of the things I'm very thankful for in being in a small department with a small training budget is I always wanted to maximize my IACP experience, the convention experience from the top. And working with the Community Policing Committee has allowed me to steal ideas and see ideas for about a 5-year period. And I've looked at this 5-year period, and I've taken these programs back, and I've looked at them as they pertain to my town. And a lot of times, I'll take some of these ideas, and they're fantastic, but policing is a local endeavor. And in a small town like mine, we don't have that type of volume to do some of these programs as they are out of the box. So they need to be massaged to fit a particular locale. And what I'd like to do is talk about 3 programs that we use, one that we crafted to meet the needs of our agency particularly, one that I actually flat out stole, and one that we actually got the muster up to create. The first thing is, Chief Fox had mentioned it earlier, is Coffee with a Cop. Every department does Coffee with a Cop. It's a very well-known program. I'm sure everybody in the room has either been to one or put one on themselves. One of the problems with a department our size, again, a little town of 10,000 people, is there's not a lot of multiple locations for these small town gatherings, where you have a well-known environment, popular, comfortable, and where you'll access all walks of life. And that's the critical component to that Coffee with a Cop program, is you do not want to preach to the choir. You can show up at the PTA meeting to talk about drug abuse and that type of thing, but the mothers that are all there are the ones that are on top of the issue from the get-go. So it's similar type of thing. So we've got creative with that process, with the Coffee with a Cop process, and have moved it to other places of business. So we didn't have multiple restaurants, so we may use it, the local pharmacy we've done it at the convenience stores, we've done it at farm stands during harvest season, we've done it at an old home day booth, we've done it at the town library. The one about the town library was particularly useful because we could invite other town officials to actually hear an earful from the town residents as well. The town clerk, the DPW director, the fire chief, DPW director won't be too happy because he'll hear about potholes all afternoon, but it works fairly well, and it actually meets that same thing of addressing quality of life issues and not just crime and crime issues. So from our perspective, changing the theme helped as well. We may not have coffee, we may have ice cream with a cop when we did the farm stand in the middle of the summer. We've done it in school parking lots where we've done ice cream with a cop, that type of thing to try and change it up a little bit. Went to the state park, same thing, give ice cream rather than coffee. But it's the same, those off-the-cuff, unplanned interactions with your citizens where you gain that type of information. One of the success stories from the program at a local coffee shop was I saw a landscape company. They do a lot of work in town, and I know they take care of a little old lady's house that is on my run. Beautifully little manicured lawn. This lady's on top of it, gets a driveway sealed every year. She's one of those old folks. And I had watched as it had run down, and the lawn was overgrown and weeds, and I see those guys, and I say, hey, what are you guys doing over there? Gosh darn, the place looks like hell. Ah, geez, it's her nephew that is now taking care of her property. He went on to say that previous winter he had to shovel out the spot to this oil spigot because he was afraid she wouldn't be able to get an oil delivery. Got back to the station later on that day and had one of the officers just go by and knock on the door and see what Mrs. Jones or whatever her name is, and just say, hey, you're looking for a red wagon, or you're looking for something, or something, lost dog, make something up, but just try and see if you can talk with her a little bit. And it turns out that it was her nephew, a great nephew actually, who had moved in and taken over the maintenance of the house, and obviously was involved in a little elder exploitation case. Turned out to be about a $20,000 take all in. And it was just that off-the-cuff kind of unplanned, not suspicious activity, but just knowing a little bit about the community and knowing a little bit about the men that took care of that property was able to provide us. The other thing we do quite often is we combine these types of events. So rather than just have a coffee event, we'll combine it with other events. This coming weekend, we have a coffee with a cop at the police station where we invite we have a local company donates a shredder truck to help shred financial documents and sensitive documents and stuff. So we'll open up the Sallyport, buy some coffee from Dunkin's, do it on a Saturday so everybody can do it on the way to the dump, come by, grab a cup of coffee, shred their documents, works pretty well. We've brought it to town meetings, any sort of hot button school board issue or a PTA meeting or things of that nature, and brought it to the local senior center. We've done it at the DPW garage, which is across the street from our school bus barn. So that interaction between the school bus drivers and the police officers was really quite interesting. And a lot of things came out about their route and some of the things that they observed. So they're very advantageous, and we've gotten a lot out of those. If anybody's interested, I put some flyers and some advertisements for some of the more creative ones on the handouts for the seminar. One of the programs I flat out stole when I was here a few years ago was a Citizen and Resident Encounters program, which operates like a registry program for citizens with special needs, autism, dementia, Alzheimer's, that type of thing. We keep their emergency contact information on file at the dispatch center, and obviously accessible to the officers through the MDTs. Have on there some physical descriptors, oftentimes a photo, a quick little blurb about their known activities, the things they prefer to do, where you might find them if they were to wander off, that type of thing. That obviously assists with communicating with, or when you're going to go visit with those residents, when you're going to communicate with them for there's a call in their neighborhood or something along those lines, or you're going to respond directly for their home. So it's kind of a little bit of a spin on the Vial of Life type of program. We've posted sign-up forms and information about that program on our website, but we also send invitations to a number of different organizations within the community, including special ed teachers and supervisors in the school system. We post it at the senior center. We do it at the over 55 community centers and over 55 community neighborhoods. We also post it at churches and local doctors' offices. For anybody that's interested in those, the sign-up forms and write-ups available in the handout section as well, or at the police department's website, which is hollispd.com. It's a very, very good program. It's allowed us to really make some decent relationships. One program we started up this last year, which was very successful, is a life skills and internship program, a volunteer opportunity for severely disabled children at the local high school. We work with the special ed department and developed a little bit of a partnership to develop this internship where they learn the life skills of washing and details and maintaining cruisers. So they basically put it out there as you could have a career in public safety vehicle maintenance. And depending on the sliding scale of disability, the child could just simply come to the station and wash the cruiser all the way to actually get with our cruiser maintenance people to do a more advanced job. It entails a job interview, a mock job interview, a job application, an orientation, and a job shadow. There are some logistics involved. One of them is they have a site supervisor at our department, which we agreed to have, which was our maintenance person, a life skills special ed teacher at the school that takes care of that end of things. We have a Department of Labor sign off because it is an unpaid internship and an unpaid kind of job, and a memorandum of understanding with the school district. The benefits are much more than I had thought. I considered it to be more of a volunteer thing, but I was surprised at the officers' interaction with the special ed department, not just the special ed students. So there was a little bit of an ancillary benefit in the sense that not only did they build some relationships with the school and with the children, but also with the special ed department as a whole, where we have a high degree of children that are involved in delinquency, unfortunately. The application, the agreement, the contracts and such are also available as handouts if anybody's interested in that type of program. There's some contact information on those handouts about the people that were involved, including their email. And feel free to steal at will.
All right, thank you. We're going to take a moment and just circle back here to the beginning of the panel and provide a quick 1 to 2 minute recap, and then I'm going to open the floor for questions. Chief Fox?
Yeah, one area that's also in the application in your entry is lessons learned. And that's a very important part of anything that you do. And the questions that we look at in grading your application is, what have you learned? What were the results? What are the actions that you've taken? And it's community partnership and the oncoming service delivery and community relations. So is it going to improve your community relations? Is it going to improve your service in the community? And the last question is there significant evidence that overall the initiative and what was learned from it have much wider applicability to other agencies? In other words, is this a program that one of you can pick up and make or change or help you in providing service in your community?
I think, to me, it all boils down to one simple statement, and that's policing is all about people. Whether it's the people who you work with and for, maybe on paper supposedly work for you, your officers, your civilian support staff, or the people in your community, it's about people and relationships and communication. And it takes a lot of effort, and we have to work at it every day, internally and externally. My agency has been through a lot in the last 3.5, 4 years. I was there for 4 months when we had our first officer-involved shooting. So that was May 12th. From May 12th through the next 12 months, we had 14 officer-involved shootings. Prior to that, we averaged one every 3 years. You didn't see Tallahassee on the news like you did some other communities. And I credit that to a little bit of my efforts, but really the relationships that existed even before that with the community, because we were able to talk with our community, explain what was going on. Our 4th officer-involved shooting was the morning of our first town hall meeting after our previous 3 and 4 weeks, a block from the church where we were having the town hall meeting. So you want to talk about not a pleasant start to the conversation that evening. But when you've developed the personal relationships, and even though I had only been there about 4 months, I had made enough of an effort and had the relationships where I had people that I would call when things were going on who started calling me back and would ask questions about different incidents, and knew that they got straightforward answers. And when some of the people were upset, one of the ministers just walked up and put his hand on my shoulder and said, "The man called me at 7 o'clock this morning so I could inform my congregation about what was going on. What more do you want?" The personal relationships, and I will tell you, I wish I had learned that 20 years earlier in my career. The personal relationships are what will make all of our organizations successful. and it all comes down to the people.
Absolutely. On that same notion, and we were talking about community engagement and trust being the natural consequence, we don't in law enforcement do a very good job of telling our story, of marketing ourselves, because we haven't had to do that in the past. And so as I mentioned, that the positive stories, we want them to overpower the negative stories. And so part of this initiative of community engagement has been another unintended consequence is that the marketing and branding of our police department has truly shown us in the most favorable light. I have officers that, as I mentioned, charging them with going out there in community engagement. So now my phone goes off with all of these selfies with kids, and my PIO is giddy because the Facebook page and the Twitter page are inundated with officers that are out there engaging the community. And so that branding has been, it's far more than, street closure or here's, do you have information on a shooting? And so the way I see it is that we have to have, 5 positives for every 1 negative. And so we're starting to brand ourselves in that way. And, we have even more initiatives that I didn't mention where the news picked up on it, but a No Shave November, our officers aren't allowed to have facial hair. So for a $50 buy-in, they were allowed to grow facial hair any way they wanted to. They looked disgusting, like grizzly bears, in the month of November last year. And with the $50 buy-in, they donated that to the Pancreatic Cancer Foundation, and obviously pink badges. So when they're out there, they're communicating and building relationships with the community that they serve. And that truly is priceless. So I really think when you mentioned branding and marketing earlier, we have to get better at that. And so this community engagement has been a consequence of that as well.
I'm struck with the determining and trying to get away from the quantitative data and looking at more qualitative data. The Chief had mentioned that earlier, and I've had the same exact experience where if you mandate a guy or a girl to do this, she's going to do that, and they're going to do that, and they're going to do it just to meet that minimum standard, and that's really not what you're looking for. You're looking for decentralizing that community policing function and having it spread through your agency. Now, how do you do that maybe with some internal and external surveys? Many of the departments here that are accredited certainly do their triannual, their accreditation survey, but I think we have to get better at that and being more granular in how we collect that qualitative data. A couple of things that we've tried is we will oftentimes appear at town hall more often than we would not. And there's a public comment section at the beginning of every selectmen's meeting on Tuesday night, for instance, in Hollis. And I will make sure that we have a representative there to kind of take in some information if something were to come up. And it's inevitable that there will be quality of life issues raised in that first 15 or 20 minutes. It's always the board's not doing something about the gravel pit operation that's causing all kinds of noise issues in the southern part of town. And we might not have heard about that. Those types of things to get a gauge on how we are being received by the community. I look at the 21st Century Policing Task Force report, and it talks about all of these things, and I do think we need to do a lot more work in understanding how to gather qualitative data rather than quantitative data.
All right. Thank you. I'd like to open up the floor to questions. If you do have some questions, I'd like you to step up to the microphone. Is there anybody that has a question for our panelists? Yes, please, come on up.
My name is Faisal Shahkar, and I'm from Police Service of Pakistan. Thank you very much for a very informative discussion on community policing. Well, we understood that it's basically building the relations. The question is that, what in your opinion are the best practices or better ways to manage the transition of police public relations when the officer is reassigned from a particular location to another? What I want to say is that he or she builds up relations. After some specific period, particularly in our system, they have to leave. How to manage this transition? He or she might have done wonderful, but when they leave, this transition management is, I need your guidance on that.
All right, if one of our panelists would
Sure.
address that question.
I can start with that just because I'm very familiar with it, especially because I have found, especially as I mentioned earlier, we have 18 community policing officers, and those are specifically assigned to different neighborhood groups. So what will happen is if one of those gets promoted or transfers to another division, I have an uproar in the community because they are losing their officer. The same is now happening with people who are getting moved, and we change districts at the beginning of the year when then we go to permanent districts. So what happens is the community's like, they pound their fists. I do not want to lose that officer. I built a relationship with that officer. But what ultimately happens is this, and we don't even do anything formal, is that the new officer then goes and starts to have conversations, and pretty soon, within that transition time, where it's probably not even a month's time, where they begin to get to know that police officer, and so we don't do anything formal, we just let that organic relationship develop naturally, but it's actually the community members that are the ones who are most upset, calling that I'm taking away their officer. They learn to love the next officer just as much as they loved that one.
I think the benefit of exactly what we're talking about decentralizing the community policing function from a unit or a specific set of officers to a department-wide philosophy, I think makes a lot of sense. We talk a lot about that one midnight shift officer we never want around people. You know, we let him only go out at night because he's like the Incredible Hulk or something. And I think that there is some truth to that issue, and that is a problem for us. We talked earlier about if you look at every car as being broken, you look at all cars are broken. Well, it's the same thing. If you spend your time on midnight shift, you think the city or the town you work in is a different place than it is at 9 o'clock on a Saturday or Sunday morning. And I think that I'm a very big opponent of the fixed shifts for that particular reason, being as small as we are as well. I am a high school baseball coach, and one of the reasons I decided to coach baseball, it's been 20 years now, was because I realized I hated teenagers. Well, why did I hate teenagers? Well, the only reason I hated teenagers is because the ones I was running into at 2 o'clock in the morning were not the ones that I was meeting on the baseball field. So I decided I needed to kind of broaden my horizons a little bit, and I think that points to the very issue and the heart of the issue, which is decentralizing this from, it's not a unit that does community policing. It is a department-wide philosophy that needs to be embodied. Now, that's easier said than done. We have varying levels of skill with our employees, but I do think the overall push for the organization is to decentralize that function.
All right. Yes, you have a question?
Hi, I'm a media consultant who works with law enforcement, and I really appreciated what you said about releasing the body cam footage before the media had it. And my question is this. As someone who works with law enforcement in the most difficult situations where they're faced with maybe the toughest situation they're going to face the department, I find that sheriffs and chiefs are very, very hesitant to put it out. And I'll go through the process with them and say, hey, this is why you should put it out. And I have some right now where they're sitting back just waiting. They're gonna wait and see what happens, and they're gonna roll the dice as they put it. And I have some who will put it out. From your perspective, to help guide me better, help guide law enforcement, how would you suggest that I go about, for lack of a better word, selling it to them? That we need to put this out now so that we're ahead of the game, because some people get it, some people don't.
Thank you.
I think part of that may be demographics as far as age and their comfort with. The fact is there are no secrets anymore, right? So 20 years ago, when reports were written on paper, there wasn't much video, things like that. What are the odds that someone's going to find that one report that might put your agency in a bad light, or you might have to explain something? With everything being electronic, whether it's your video, somebody's cell phone video, somebody's private surveillance camera, it's out there. It's not if it comes out, it's when. So my thing is, I'd rather be the messenger and shape what comes forward and say, here it is, this is what we're doing about it, as opposed to having somebody come in and shape my story for me. And I think that's what we all talk about owning it. And if we want to talk about transparency and accountability, you can't do that if you're hoping nobody finds it.
Can I do one follow-up, which is that a lot of them are saying, well, our DA doesn't want us to put it out. We're going to rely on the DA says no. And I'm sitting here like, you guys, they're gonna blame the DA, but then the community still looks at the chief or the sheriff as the one responsible.
And that's where they need to remember they don't work for the DA. I don't work for the state attorney. I get along well with the state attorney. We call each other. Sometimes we call each other names. Sometimes they're nice names. Sometimes they're not. And we have a good relationship. I'm on my second state attorney. I'm on my fourth sheriff. It's been a really tumultuous time in my region. But the fact is we have to remember who we work for. We work for our citizens, our community, And we work for our officers in our agency, and it's our responsibility to put them in the situation where we can explain what happened to the best of our abilities and explain the investigative steps, as opposed to letting someone else dictate it. And to me, if I don't go out and represent my officers and explain what they did 99 times out of 100 was lawful, was appropriate, and I've said it 1,000 times, there is no use of force that looks pretty. It's someone using violence against another human being. However, it's legal. This is why we do it. This is how we do it. It shouldn't look good, and it should make you feel uncomfortable when you see it, because the day everyone's comfortable with it, we're going to have more serious social issues than we have now. And I just put it out there, and I'd rather own that responsibility. And to me, I take part of that as that is part of taking care of my people, is being the messenger to the community about the issue.
I can say this as one of the older people in the room. Policing has changed. And to the young people in the room, if you're not changing, we didn't have a trust problem in the 60s, in the 70s. Maybe in the 70s we did, we came out of it. But we have a trust problem now. You know, people don't trust us. And we gotta be smart and police differently. And we can't hide anything. If you hide something as a chief, you will not survive, because the truth will come out, one way or the other. So transparency, whether we like the word or not, you better put it in your vocabulary.
Such a fluid environment, too. I think that the trust issues that the chief is mentioning also are with our employees. And I think this issue has not come to rest. It's very fluid in our collective bargaining agreements sometimes across the country, very wildly as to how these officer-involved shootings and use of forces are taken into account. So I think it's important to understand that part of it as well, as what that says to somebody's family, what that says to that officer when it's so fresh. And I think that is being settled as well. But that's a trust issue that we have with our own employees, not just with the communities we serve.
Thank you. To touch on that issue, one of the things that I would mention is, as you're sitting here and we're looking at building on police branding, being transparent is a brand. Being honest is a brand. It's expected and it's demanded of our public. So I think when you're talking about issues that come up that are less favorable or favorable, it's important to get that information out there right away, because it shows that you're being accountable, you're owning the actions, as Chief DeLeo had said, and it's important for us to do it. Now, I do have a question for the panel, for any one of them. And this is something that I've heard other chiefs and sheriffs bring up in the past. How does your agency gain buy-in from frontline staff, especially maybe veterans that have been successful utilizing another philosophy of policing, and now community engagement, community policing philosophy has been instilled? How have you gained buy-in from your frontline staff to help build a successful community policing program? This is open to any panelist.
I'm going to tie it back into branding, and I really didn't realize as a new chief I was doing it. I brought a book entitled I've Always Looked Up to Giraffes with me as chief, and I had my command staff read it. And if you've ever read a book on giraffes or the story of giraffes, giraffes stand head and shoulders above the crowd. They got great vision. They can see a person a mile away. They can get places quickly. They run 30, 40 miles an hour. They are aggressive. They can kick in 4 different directions. They're the symbol of friendship in Africa. They're very caring, got big ears, they're good listeners, on and on. Well, we were a tiger type of agency. We were an enforcement agency. We didn't have good community relations. And I took that philosophy, and I not only took it to the department that I wanted us to be the best and stand head and shoulders above the crowd, but I also took it to the community. I actually created my leadership coin that had a giraffe on one side. Kind of funny, I went to the range one day and I looked on the wall at one of the firearm instructors and TAC team officers' office, and he had a tiger eating a giraffe. I asked him how long do you want to stay at the academy. But we took that and it became the theme. And it became our brand. We wanted to have good vision. We were caring. We wanted trust. We would listen. We were going to be innovative. We were going to be a change agent. And you wouldn't believe how many boxes of giraffes I have from the community, from the schools that I talked to. So it became a brand. But it also sent the message from the chief, this is what we're all about. We're not the lions and tigers that we used to be. Now, yes, at times you have to be the warrior. We can't take warrior out of our vocabulary because at times we are in war, but not every day. But taking that branding or something, whatever it is, I could have failed by using a giraffe, but I won in the community and in the agency, and it kind of helped me take a new philosophy into the organization.
I think also you show the outcome and how it benefits them. I talked about some of our outcomes, and even after we had our taser incident, at that time when we had the incident where the 60-year-old woman was tased, I only had enough tasers for my patrol officers. About almost half my agency didn't have tasers. Within 8 months, I had brand new tasers for 400 officers because of the approach we took with the community internally. And when the officers, and you got the 25 or 30-year veteran, or even the new guy who came in and, well, this is how I learned it and this is how we do it, and you show the outcome and say, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it. Here, yes, I'm the crazy chief from the outside and nobody knows me, but there's a method here, and look at where we are now we've gotten the technology, we've gotten equipment, we're getting laptops, we're getting new records management system, new vehicles, rebranding, remarketing, on the verge of getting funding for a $70 to $90 million new police facility that 2 years, when I got there and I asked about it, I was literally laughed at. Now it's when can we get it done? And so if that personal relationship of the buy-in, and you show the small successes, and as we continue to move forward, I think that's what it boils down to.
I'll say it again. I can tell you when we forced it upon them, that's when we failed. It's when we gave them the autonomy to be creative in the way that they engage the community. That's when it took off, and the buy-in was just a natural consequence of allowing police officers to be more authentically themselves instead of just the paramilitary, allowing them to be human. I believe that they actually want more of that, and so by giving them permission to do that, that's all the buy-in that it needed.
I think the same thing. I think pushing across the fact that this is a marathon and showing the small victories in our quest, we've allowed the narrative to be hijacked as if there's an either or. There's not an either or. It's not you have to be a fuzzy buzzy cop or you got to be a hard on crime cop. There's not this easy, macro thing that we've allowed to kind of take hold. And I think if you show that you balance the needs of your employees with that of the town, and that you'll handle everything that comes your way in a fair and impartial manner over the entire marathon, that I think eventually you get to the point where they will see, because the truth has a funny way of just being the truth. You can boil it, you can bake it, you can do whatever you want, but at the end it's a pure element. And the fact of the matter is these principles are true. If you work with your people and you understand the needs of that community and you match up your law enforcement resources with those needs, things will happen well. And I think after a while, people will see that, the employees will see that it actually does work, and then they're much more likely to continue the tradition.
I'm going to ask a question. How many of you have a PIO? Probably everybody. I know in a small agency that the PIO probably wears 3 or 4 or 5 hats. But in the larger agencies, even in the larger agencies, are they dealing with media issues 8 hours, 10 hours a day? Normally not. I had 4 people assigned to the PIO office. When I came in, I changed the name to Corporate Communications. They became the marketing group. If we had a great program, they were the ones that would sell it. If we had something on video that was good, they're the ones that put it out. They're the ones that put the good and the bad out from the video. But they are the ones that were my marketing team. So if I needed something to be sold, prepare a news conference, we're going to put this out, and then I would speak. But think about that. You know, sharing the good. You're going to hear the bad. So create a mechanism within the agency. And it's very simple. It's branding, it's marketing. And we're not good at it. And we've got to get better at it, especially in this time. And I'm sure he's probably here. Look at the Las Vegas sheriff and how the media has taken something and he's really having to deal with media issues as well as the incident. That never happened in the past. So we got to get a little bit smarter from the branding and the marketing.
Sir.
Greg Marr from San Francisco. One of the questions I had would, when you're going outside the traditional thinking, outside the box, what were your challenges to try to get buy-in with your mayors or your respective city managers or the board of soups or counselors? Because those are the ones that sometimes they think so traditionally, says you're going to give them an unusual solution, and they say, no, we can't do that. And what was your challenges?
There are a lot of challenges, especially, I had not been a chief before. I came, where my previous agency, I was the deputy chief. So, there was a little pushback of, well, you don't know what you're doing. And I was like, but you hired me, right? You hired me. I outlined, my interview process was about 6 different interviews with community groups, with the manager, and for better or for worse, I was the collective overall, pick. I said, you brought me here for a reason. And we had some very frank conversations. I've said, I'm a very direct person. And I told the manager, she had been the manager for about 17 years. And in a city our size, that's kind of unusual because we've got about 300,000 people. So it's not a small community. I said, I'm going to do things the hard way sometimes. And I gave her some very honest references too. I said, I'll tell you what they're going to tell you. He's going to work hard, he's bright, he's professional, but he's also stubborn, and he's going to dig in, and he's going to do it his way. And I said, so if you don't want change, I know you're telling the community you want change, but if you don't really want it, don't hire me. You're going to be miserable, I'm going to be miserable, this isn't going to work. And there were some fights and there were some headbutts and along the way. I always appreciate she gave me the opportunity, and there were some things she was absolutely right and I should have approached differently, and there's lessons learned, and that's part of the growth process for me. And there are some things she goes, all right, this is on you, and it's worked out. And I think that's that relationship as you deal with your manager or your mayor, your commission, depending on how your structure is. And again, it's that personal relationship of, you've got me here, this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is why. And that leap of faith, either when they put you in that position and they're going to support you, and sometimes like with me, with the changes they made, it's kind of stuck with me for at least a little while. You brought me in with the fan of all this, and here's what we're going to do. But I also had some very good support, just that initial through the interview process, where they involved the community members. The president of the NAACP was adamant that they hire me because I had a department-wide community policing philosophy and plan that I wanted to put in place. And he's like, I don't even want to hear about anybody else. So, I had some of that built-in support, and those were some of my biggest advocates coming in and with those relationships dealing in, and they would run interference for me. No, we've heard about the chief's plan. You need to let him do this.
I'm extremely fortunate in my city. Our mayor is very community-minded. The only thing that I ever need to be cautious of is to blindside him by something. So if there's a new initiative, I make sure that I tell him in our update meetings just so he's aware. But he's so community-minded that he's inviting us to birthday parties, and he loves to see the officers everywhere. The only pushback I ever got, and I wouldn't even call it pushback, was but just the risk management, saying, okay, these guys are playing basketball and they're going to hurt themselves. And I'm like, maybe. But that's it.
I think we have to get away from the thought process that crime rates tell the story. The crime rates do not tell the entire story. I think we've spent years and years and years getting a pat on the back about crime rates, and then we get mad and hurt when we have to take the brunt of a crime rate that, quite honestly, we don't have much impact on in a lot of times. If the city chief in a town where there's a state prison, they open up the doors of the state prison, all of a sudden there's an increase in crime. Well, geez Louise, I mean, he doesn't have it. So I think changing the narrative a lot of times is to not looking at so much the quantitative data, but the qualitative data from my perspective has helped. And I've tried to use that to sell these types of programs because a lot of times they are associated with some costs. And anytime I've had to justify those costs, I had to get out of the habit of justifying those costs through data, which is crime rates, car stops, you know, the counting things like the chief had said. So moving more to a qualitative data model rather than a quantitative data model helps me.
If I understood your question correctly, you're not getting the support that you need in government above?
Well, in San Francisco, we're very political, so we're tied with politics. And in fact, as a follow-up question, I had an idea that's really outside of traditional policing. We have a lot of officers that come into our agency, and sometimes it's a second career. You don't know how many attorneys we have, teachers. We have a boatload of people that do construction. I thought, hey, what would be a great idea, or why don't we exploit those skills? Send them out, hey, you're going to work with Habitat for Humanity. You're an attorney. Hey, I want you to work with some of the, like our Casa de la Maza, these victims of domestic violence. Of course, you have to work with your city attorneys as far as, you know, what are the guidelines and how do you use them. I'll use myself an example. I was a dentist before I became a police officer, but I do serve in these low-income facilities, the community dentistry. So I mean, these are great when I found from my own experience with people, hey, you're a cop, let me see your gun. No, I don't need to show you a gun. Here's my business card, here's my star. And they get so, I guess it's a novelty, but when you go in the community, they find out you're doing something different. I think you get that sense, hey, you're just more than a cop, you're actually a human being.
You're part of the community. And what you're talking about, we just, actually, yesterday I missed our third part of our habitat build. We're helping build 2 houses right now. And not only were we doing it, but we've got it so ingrained, our cadet program went out on a Saturday and our teenagers with their advisors went out and worked on the house. So the things you're talking about that you want to do is exactly what you need to be doing. And like I said, it's building that relationship with the commission or to say, go do it.
Those are great ideas. We're going to make phone calls to your city leadership, all of us.
Thank you. Yep.
And be patient. You know, as cops, we're not very patient. I know as chief I wasn't, and I really had to learn that. Plant seeds. Know the right people to help you plant the seeds. If you plant them and you fertilize them and you water them, they'll happen. But you got to have a little patience. Don't drive it down their throat.
All right, thank you. As we're coming to a close, I think you can really see where this all hits home. It's about building relationships. It's not just buy-in with your community, it's buy-in with your officers, it's buy-in with your city or county leadership. And I think Chief DeLeo said it well, that he didn't do his promotions right away because they were just dating. You almost have to look at it as if you're dating because you're constantly building those relationships from your frontline staff all the way to your command staff with your mayors, your council persons, etc. And with that, folks, I want to thank you all for attending today's workshop. I hope you got something out of it. I know I did. And I wish you well here at this year's IACP 2017. Take care.